didn't introduce you to my panel. Duh. Okay. Leela, why don't we get started with you? I'm going to have each of you just give a brief introduction of yourself, kind of your recruiting metrics background, so everybody gets to know you.
Sure thing, Katrina. Hi, everyone. My name is Leela Srinivasan, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Lever. And I come to this subject with a couple of different hats. So one is I've been working in and around the recruitment space for the last 6.5 years or so, first at LinkedIn, quick hiatus where I actually ended up doing more employer branding than marketing, I think, at OpenTable, and then over to Lever. And so I'm kind of a certified recruiting junkie. So I've been working near and with recruiting teams the last several years around metrics. I also, prior to joining LinkedIn, actually was a management consultant. So I've got that recovering consultant MBA kind of geek deep within, which I'm more than willing to bust out on request. And then the last thing is, of course, being a chief marketing officer, marketing today is exceptionally data-driven. And I think one of the reasons I was so excited for today's conversation is that I've been going to recruiting conferences over the years, and I've lost track of the number of HR and recruiting leaders who stand up on stage and sheepishly say, oh, I'm not very good with numbers, or, you know, math isn't my thing. Enough, we need to fix this. And so this should be a great conversation.
Absolutely. Will, you're next.
So my name's Will Thompson. I'm the founder of Bullseye Recruiting. I've been in recruiting for about 21 years, and I'm excited about talking about this topic. Believe it or not, when you're a small business owner, you have to evaluate everything. So metrics are very important. And I know a lot of people on this call are small businesses, and hopefully we can share some stories and talk a little bit about it, what I've done and what you've done, and help metrics be your friend, not your enemy.
Absolutely. Last but certainly not least.
Hi guys, I'm Siddharthi Kadaman. I'm a lead consultant with Proactive Talent Strategies, and my background is also a bit of a mixture of human resources and program and high volume recruiting. University recruiting programs led me to employer branding, and really leveraging metrics for me has always been, I am, Leela and Will, that HR leader that's like, I'm not very good with numbers. I'm not a numbers gal, but I use data not to dictate my actions, but to validate my actions. And so asking questions and leveraging information about engagement and actions that come from that is the lens I look at data through. So I'm excited for today's conversation because I am definitely here holding the banner for you guys that are not comfortable with numbers.
I totally get that. I'm one of those too. Okay, so now we'll get back into the questions, because we do want to start with quality data versus noise. Because a lot of times, you know, when we go on these types of webinars, people just kind of, you know, beat us with metrics. They say, you need to measure this, you need to measure that. And I think that blanket strategy might not always be the right answer. So I want to go round robin and talk about what data do you think is the most important, and what do you think can be ignored? Will, let's start with you, because you know you're running a recruiting firm, and I know a lot of people on the line are in the same seat. So let's start with your numbers.
Yeah, I mean, there are four main buckets of things that are important to me, and it's, you know, it's the resources that are required to hire individuals, where you got them, the cost of what it, you know, to hire somebody, and the source, metrics to help determine, you know, how we're going to get paid. You know, that's as a third-party recruiter, that's something that's important to us. And you know, last, you know, what value do we bring to the customer that we can sell and say, okay, Bullseye Recruiting does this better, and this is some data behind it. But those are some of the four main areas the metrics that I like to measure, just being a small business owner. And those have changed, like we talked about before the call, when I was a corporate recruiter and working at Dell and eBay and things like that. But, you know, that's what as a small business owner, those are things that I'm concerned about.
Yeah. So, Leela, is that pretty consistent with what you've heard from your customers?
Well, so here's the thing, Katrina. I mean, I hate to say this, but this almost feels like a trick question, just because, you know, asking what data is most important, it really depends what you're trying to accomplish, right? Because there's the old adage that if you can't manage what you don't measure, and vice versa, if you're not measuring it, you can't manage it. And so I think this is going to be very company specific, very even function specific. So for instance, the way Lever, just so you know, is coming up on about 100 employees now. I don't know that we necessarily had much of a metrics focus when we were much smaller, but now we're starting to think about things very differently. Equally, if I think back to time at LinkedIn and other places, when we were looking at sales hiring, it was very much about velocity. So time to fill was much more important, because of course every week or month that a butt wasn't in a seat was a week of sales productivity that you were losing, and that of course had an effect on top line revenue. Whereas you look at hiring in our engineering team, for example, I think one of the things that some of our clients on our customer advisory council, for example, were recently asking was, can we get metrics on the number of hours it's taking our existing team to hire an engineer? Because of course every hour that an engineer is spending interviewing somebody is an hour that they're not spending doing engineering work. And so there's definitely there's an opportunity cost associated with recruitment. And so, I hate to say it depends, but it totally depends on what you're trying to accomplish. And I've just seen such a wide variety of things that you really have to kind of step back and think about what it is, what is not working in your process, or where do you need to drive better results and better performance, and then, work backwards from that.
Yeah, totally. Do you want to add anything, Steph?
Yeah, I would honestly build off of what Leela was saying. It shouldn't be something that's the metrics and the data that you're pulling shouldn't necessarily be dictating your actions. They should be validating them, proving or disproving them. So when I look at noise of data, it's interesting. Having a background in university and program recruitment, instantly my eyes roll when people start to say time to hire or cost per hire, because it could take me a year to hire 40 people depending upon sort of the landscape. So where I tend to focus more, especially from a talent brand perspective, are metrics that align to sort of the brand and experience, the perception of that to the external marketplace. I also look at quality of candidate, so I double down more on things like applicant to employee conversion and all the steps along the way. Those are the metrics that I put a lot more emphasis on, just given the perspective I come in at it with. For me, and from the view I'm looking at, unless I'm trying to build a business case to leadership to save my leaders time, save my business stakeholders time in recruiting, then I'm not necessarily looking at the time or cost to hire, because I don't own that workflow. If I've got, I think we've all worked in recruiting teams where you have each and every hiring manager you have has a completely different interview process and time to fill and where they want to post and all that fun stuff. So does it really become a valid metric to look at time to hire and cost per hire as a metric for your recruiting team? That's a metric for your business stakeholders and making a case for developing a more strategic and streamlined process. But it really, your recruiter doesn't own that workflow, and measuring that based on their performance, to me, seems like a disconnect. So that's the stuff I tend to ignore. I don't ignore anything, but I put it at priority too, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Well, and I think you made a great point. Like, you ignore what you can't control. If you can't control it, then it's not work. Obviously you should measure it, but at the same time, maybe that's not the first slide in your reporting deck, right? When you go
or maybe
to the
that's not what's driving your overall strategy. We'll talk later about some of the other ways to use metrics to influence your executives and your teammates. That's not the type of metric that's going to move either one of those mountains, I don't think.
Yeah, no, I would propose, rather than ignoring it or throwing up your hands and saying, oh, I can't do anything about this one, I don't control it, you actually have an obligation and an opportunity to partner with the business and bring it to their attention. If it's a hiring manager miss or an interview panel miss that is causing you to not be hitting a specific goal, then that's really an opportunity for dialogue. But I totally agree with that. You can't necessarily you can't judge your recruitment team based on things they specifically are not driving. Yeah.
But I completely agree. You should be tracking them as improvement areas for future initiatives or workflow improvements. You know, you can't ignore them altogether, but to me, if I'm using the metrics to build a strategy or to engage a team, then those may not be the metrics I put at P1, that they're priority 2.
Absolutely. We had a quick question come in from Troy for you, Will, about how you determine value. So is there an equation or, how do you come to that number?
Yeah, I mean, if candidates stay at a role for an extended amount of time and they achieve success, that to me is value. If you're able to find the person in a short amount of time, and like I think Lily, you were saying, get that salesperson in, get the butt in the seats quickly, that is value. Otherwise, they're losing money every time someone's not out there selling their product. But if you can show your customer that you can find someone quickly and they'll have longevity and have success, that's value in my eyes.
Yeah, totally. I hope that helps, Troy. Thank you for your question. So then the next thing, so to boil that down, right, we hit on a few different numbers and kind of the why, but what's your VIP metric? What's that one that you're like, if you don't measure anything else, if you insist on sticking to that whole I suck at math and I'm not going to measure things, what's the one that you think people should absolutely measure? And whoever wants to go first, please do.
So I'll share, not because I think it's the one metric everyone needs to track, but just as an example of what I was saying earlier about different metrics matching at different stages of a company's trajectory. So for the last quarter or so, our recruiting team has been very focused on conversion rate between final round and to offer, basically. So whether you're using Lever or some other robust system, hopefully you can actually see your conversion rate stage by stage in your funnel, which I think is sort of understanding your process and where it's working, where it's not. But for us, the final round at Lever is this 3-hour saga called the career trajectory. It's modeled after G.H. Smart's Who, and it goes deep into kind of the psychology of the candidate, looking at every stage of their career, starting with high school sometimes or college and going through, what did they accomplish, what were the highs, the lows, why did they move on, all that good stuff. It's sort of like a sort of deeply psychological interview. And for the candidate, it's really cathartic and valuable, and you walk out of there sometimes saying things you've never said in your life. For our recruiting team, it's 3 hours, and we have a very lean recruiting team. And so what we can't afford to be doing, while we know this is absolutely the right way to evaluate mutual fit and make sure this is right for the candidate as well as for us, it's very, very resource consuming. And so we want to make sure that if we're taking the step of bringing people in for that final round career trajectory, that we're bringing the right people in. And so Amanda, our head of recruiting, actually set a fairly steep goal in terms of that conversion rate that we want to see. And she shares out on that consistently to make sure that we're living up to the standard and we're not burning team time on the wrong candidates. So that's where we are right now. I'll have a different answer next quarter for you probably. That's just how this kind of works, right?
Absolutely. I think that's a great point too. It evolves, right? Sometimes your VIP metric changes based on your needs. Go ahead, sorry.
I'll hop in. Leela gave my number 2, which leaves me open for my number 1.
This feels like, is it Family Fortunes or whatever, where it's like, our survey said. I got the number 2 answer, yeah.
Oh yeah, very cute.
Katrina, don't go around kissing everyone. That's just not. But I am really in love with the whole idea of the Net Promoter Score, NPS. And again, this is my lens of employment brand and recruiting optimization. Having a candidate go through that journey, even the one that Leela described with a 3-hour odyssey at the end, which sounds awesome, by the way, to me, to have them walk away even without a job offer and still be recommending that people talk to your company is to me validation that you hit the right audience with the right message. Maybe it didn't work out today, but it could work out down the road, and like attracts like if they're saying good things. I also like to leverage the Net Promoter Score internally to my stakeholders. Are we giving them the right experience? Are we not, are we educating them enough about the workflow, and do they know what they need to do? Are the tools easy for them to use? And do you have more people wanting to join the outreach process because of it? So I'm really got a huge heart around NPS these days, but conversion is absolutely my number two for each step of the process. Those are your opportunities to manipulate and adjust as the process go along, and it's so important to track.
Yeah, and I love NPS too because it's very qualitative, right? It's not something that, you get to the number and then you don't quite know what to do. When you
Yeah,
have qualitative data like that, you're able to point to specific parts and course correct as needed.
exactly.
Yeah, I think with so NPS obviously was very much sort of borrowed from marketing and loyalty kind of circles, but I think where I've seen people fail at implementing NPS generally, not specifically within recruiting, is not taking the time to drill down to the root causes. So the score itself is one thing, right, and you can track that as a benchmark over time, but really understanding the why behind, what is going on with this massive pool of the passives in the middle that are, scoring you a 7 or 8 on that 0 to 10 scale and not actually going all the way to promoter. What do you need to do to get them over that hurdle? Or if they're giving you a really low score, what were the drivers of that and what can you then improve in your process?
Exactly. Exactly.
And for Candace, who asked, what does NPS stand for? It's Net Promoter Score. It basically
Yeah.
means how likely you would be to tell a friend that they should absolutely do this. And that obviously works for marketing, for recruiting, all that. Will, from your perspective, what's your VIP metric?
So I'm a recruiter. I'm a third-party recruiter, and for the most simple, in the words of Greg Savage, is how many submissions do you get to get an interview? Because without an interview, nothing happens, right? And then bottom line, if you were to have one metric, if you don't have any interviews, you're not getting any hires. So that to me is so key. And how are we going to get those interviews, and how are we going to close them in a short amount of time? But that's what hits home closest with me.
That makes sense, right? Because you're very much on that front end working with the clients. And we just had a pile of questions come in. So we're going to cut over to those questions. Question for Sedef. What success stories do your clients appreciate in terms of metrics? So how do you tie the number to the story?
I think some of the best advice I ever got was, read the room. When you're dealing with your stakeholders and your internal customers or external customers, I think one of the most important things is to understand what they're working towards. What are their values? What are the metrics that they're being evaluated against? And you need to be able to translate that into their language. We of course have our own agenda here in recruiting and HR. There are the lever t-shirts I'm loving right now at the bottom here, ladies.
Sorry.
We've got our agenda and topics that we want to talk, but I think oftentimes we get tripped up by doing it in what I call HR speak. We talk in our language, use our terminology. And, a lot of times, for example, business leaders are focused on something as simple as productivity. You want to talk to them about creating a new manager training, maybe a rotation program for your early in career folks. You don't necessarily go talking about how wonderfully personally enriching those programs are going to be for those employees. You may want to lead with, by getting the employee skill set up to this level, productivity potentially can increase here, we can fill a gap that you have here, and the cost overall for hiring will come down because you'll have a workforce more able to be promoted into new roles. So I guess, my long-winded way of saying is put it in their language, put their priorities first, because that is ultimately what we should be working for. We are a support function, after all, as dramatically wonderful as each of us are. We support the business to achieve its goals. So I think one of the things we miss when we're getting sort of overwhelmed with the metrics and numbers is to put those metrics and numbers into their language and make sure that their priorities are our priorities when we're sharing information. Does that answer the question?
Yes,
Hope
totally.
it does.
That was a good answer.
Absolutely. We're getting a lot of questions about NPS, how you actually do it. Now, I definitely know from a marketing perspective, and Leela, can you translate the marketing NPS to recruiting NPS?
Yeah, so as Katrina said, and even if you haven't heard of NPS before, I can almost guarantee you've answered the question because the sort of the main question in NPS is literally on a scale of 0 to 10, and it's very important that it's 0 to 10 and not 1 to 10, where 0 is not at all likely and 10 is extremely likely. How likely are you to recommend company XYZ as a place to work, or applying to XYZ as a place to work, something like that? And so it begins with that question. I see clients tuck that into surveys that go out to candidates. I've seen what I love to see is where people take the time not just to survey the successful candidates, but also the ones who didn't make it, because I think then you get balanced feedback, and you also are sort of choosing reality, if you will, just choosing to look at both sides of the equation. And then, as I said, sort of the main thing to ask after that question is why. Okay, so explain your score. Try and understand what it is that drove them to give that score. You could certainly add other questions that help, probe into specific aspects of the experience to try and get more color. And then once you get the score itself, the way you calculate NPS is you look at the percentage of people who basically graded you a 9 or a 10 on that 0 to 10 point scale. That makes them a promoter. So it's a very high bar. And you subtract from that percentage, you subtract the number of people who scored you 0 to 6. So they're the detractors, and you leave out that 7 and 8 pile of people that are passive, basically, and that gives you a score. So your NPS score can be negative if you have more detractors than promoters. It can be flat. It can be positive. It's actually quite hard to get a positive NPS when you look across your entire candidate base, because let's face it, interviewing is not people's favorite thing to do quite often, and so you're going to hear some home truths when you dig into the responses there a little bit, but it's a very, very healthy thing to do. And I think the reason it's become such a powerful metric is it actually came out of Bain & Company, where I used to work, and there was a lot of research done around the fact that it was a much greater predictor of loyalty and people's likelihood to repeat purchase or stay a customer of a company. And so, of course, the analogies and the similarities abound between marketing and recruitment these days, and so unsurprisingly, we've seen that metric start to gain traction in recruiting circles as something that can help them understand that candidate experience, and then ultimately, it translates over into the employee world as well.
Totally.
I've even noticed the free tools like SurveyMonkey and whatnot will give you an option to insert NPS as one of your questions in the appropriate format with the right algorithm behind it to evaluate it. But honestly, I completely just want to add to Leela's comment, you have to give it to everyone, not just your successful candidates. Everyone's got to see it, or else you're sort of living in honeymoon land there. So.
And for third-party recruiting, I'm sure that's really helpful for your clients, right? Doing a survey with them, seeing what they think, so that you can improve your process. For those of you who are sitting in Will's seat and working on specifically third-party recruiting.
100% correct.
Lisa, I'm sorry, I just want to interject this here. NPS to me, it so suits today's talent marketplace as well, because we're very much in sort of that CrowdShare, Glassdoor, the recommendations, Yelp sort of time frame for community building. And so it is a very valid question that I think resonates well. And looking at some of the research, Pew had a survey out earlier this year, 50% of millennials won't purchase anything from companies that they don't align to their values. They also won't work for those companies. So getting your information out there to the right audience that it will resonate with becomes that much more important.
And where would you guys say is a good place to look for more information on NPS? My suggestion, just another question, I think Lee asked it, but I said look up the marketing NPS, just marketing NPS, steal their survey and translate it into candidate speak, translate it into your process. You guys have any add-ons to that?
I usually, with NPS, I'm like, same thing, different agenda. I agree. Go look at some of the marketing. Even simple Google searches will give you some interesting sort of SlideShare decks that people have done to explain NPS. But it is really as simple as it sounds. I think a lot of people get tripped with it, like, can't be that simple, and it is very simple, and it's about keeping it simple that really is the impactful part about it.
Yeah, definitely, and don't be afraid to talk to your marketing team if you work at a corporation, because they're probably either marketing or customer success or somebody in your building is probably already using NPS in a different way. So you can probably learn some internal best practices too.
Totally. One more question on NPS. This is a really popular topic from Richard. Steph, when do you have the survey? So he's saying, do you apply NPS to phone screens as well as face-to-face? Do you do intermittent? Where does it fit in?
My experience has been wherever the end of the process is for that candidate. If it's, at the end of the phone screen, to me, I feel a lot more comfortable sending everyone who we've at least engaged with. And to me, a conversation, even if it's a phone screen, is an engagement. So if you engage with that candidate, at the end of their process, be it phone screen, office visit, offer, or rejection at any point along that way, that's when you send the survey about the experience. I do recommend that you have customized surveys, though. You don't want to send a candidate who only got a phone screen a survey that talks about an office visit, so let's be kind and thoughtful. But that just means making it sort of easy. I try to keep it also to no more than like 4 or 5 questions on these surveys if possible, just to increase the likelihood that people will respond.
Right.
I couldn't agree more to that. So 2 things. Yes, the brevity is really important because people start to get ticked off if it goes on too long, and also this point around customizing it to make sure you send the appropriate survey to the right person, because if you botch a survey, that will become something that ends up on social, and people are like pissy about the fact that you are asking them about an on-site interview they didn't get, or whatever it happens to be. So definitely be sensitive to what you're sending to whom.
I think we just have to remember we're dealing with people in an emotional state. The job search process is emotional. It's a high, it's a low, it's everything in between, kind of like dating, but I won't do that today. I have many theories on how recruiting and dating are the same thing, even though Matt disagrees with me. But it's an emotional process. So when we can be thoughtful, when we can use brevity, it will increase response. I think a lot of times people are hesitant to send communications, surveys, links, whatever, because they're afraid of negative repercussions if they said the wrong thing and if they did the wrong thing. But if you can just sort of take a moment, say, how can I make this as easy as possible for the person receiving it, you get a lot more response.
Totally. Getting a lot of compliments here. I just have to give a shout out to all of you. Lee said, this is the best episode of Hollywood Squares ever.
Yes!
And I thought it was Family Fortunes, wrong game show, right?
Whichever one, we're doing great. And thank you all for being here so much. People, keep your questions coming. We have so many pouring in. A question from Will Staney, who I know works with you, Steph. He said, what metrics would you include in your recruiter scorecard?
Again, I think it's important, but what's on that scorecard is what you populate that scorecard with, and I'll let Lena take this one a lot heavier because I know that Lever's got some great tools for that. But what you populate that scorecard with is about engaging that recruiter, giving them information that's practical for them to learn and be better from. Then absolutely, I think those scorecards are important. When balanced scorecards first started making it sort of showing in the early 90s, I was working in strategy consulting, and it just makes a lot of sense to be able to track different areas of your business. So I'm very happy to see it's made its way into HR.
Gosh, that's a whole topic into itself. So I don't want to. So spoiler alert! I wanted to show at the end of the webinar just our new job posting dashboards, because I think they're actually packed full of the type of indicators and metrics that you can use. And I think so. A couple of things come to mind. Number one is I think on any scorecard is to try and have a balance of like leading indicators and like trailing metrics, so that you're not just solely looking backward. And also, if you think about the metrics that would matter, it's a combination of very short-term transactional, are they getting the job done? So it might, in a bygone era, I don't know about today, it might have been, for example, in-mail response rates might be something that a company was tracking if LinkedIn was a major source of candidates. But also, we talked about NPS and the importance of loyalty and satisfaction. You should be somehow measuring the satisfaction of your hiring managers as a big part of the equation. And in fact, I think I think it was Burson and Associates recently published something saying it's like the #1 indicator of high performance talent teams is that relationship with the business and with hiring managers. And so in addition to surveying your candidates, you want to be getting feedback as well from hiring managers and making sure that you understand that relationship with the business, how healthy that is, because that's going to be a huge sign of whether or not you've got a healthy talent acquisition function and one that's really meeting the goals of the business.
Absolutely. I was going to say, Will, you've managed a lot of recruiters. Like what metrics do you think are important to drive that production? Because that's the end goal, right? A scorecard is great, but you want results. So what kind of metrics do you think fit that bill?
So, I mean, I think, like I said, that people that can get someone to the end line, I mean, can actually get someone hired. So, it totally depends on, what their response rate is for in-mails or, emails and are they moving people along through the process? And, if they're not doing that, if people aren't getting interviews, if you don't see them being successful, then there's a lot of things that you can improve upon. So I think it's not to be a micromanager, but just to kind of see, what's working and what's not, and then kind of redirecting them if they need to be redirected.
Yeah, and it's not micromanagement at all, as you said. Well, I mean, so going back to, what's the behavior you're trying to motivate? How are you incentivizing your people or helping them focus on what matters? So, for instance, in talking with folks like Jim Schneider over at PepsiCo, he's very focused on the front end sourcing, and the discussion we were having earlier, it's not right to measure his sourcing team on hires and kind of the downstream impact, because there's so many other variables and personnel involved in those decisions. But what he can measure the team on upfront is that sort of time to slate. So how quickly can they assemble a quality slate of candidates that are right for advancing to the next level? So again, it's sort of where do you want your team to focus based on what they're required to do, and how do you measure that and hold them accountable to it through a scorecard or any other means?
You want that healthy relationship with your manager for sure. So if they're X amount of flow per, and you're delivering upon that, then that's great. If not, and they're unhappy, then the whole talent acquisition process could be shot. So
yes,
absolutely.
I agree.
You don't want that.
Anything you can arm your recruiters with in that sort of talent advisor type role. You don't want to be, you need that close relationship with your stakeholders and hiring managers, not to be their order taker, but to be their consultant on how to get them the best talent available in the marketplace. So, when I'm thinking about how I measure my recruiters, it's about quality of candidate, understanding of market. So there's some traditional metrics that fall into that, some non-traditional metrics, conversion metrics that can all really be leveraged to help motivate your recruiter to be that better advisor to the business.
Absolutely.
Yeah. On a different note, actually, one that I recently heard about, one of our larger clients was saying that their entire recruiting team have committed to making sure that no candidate goes more than 48 hours without a touch point when they're in the cycle. So it's almost like setting a really high bar for an SLA, if you will, because they recognize how competitive it is to really engage the right candidates specifically in Silicon Valley in this instance. And so,
And to make them feel that high touch aspect, it takes very little of our days to, put in SLAs like that, like, okay, every 48 hours there is going to be some point of contact. I've been a candidate in processes like that. It makes a difference. I think it all comes down to sometimes those little things that make a difference, and you can track that. You can build a larger strategy that allows you to be consistent like that, and then track that through your metrics.
Leela, you're so right. I mean, it's so important to have those extra touch points, and it is so competitive right now. And I think that's what's going to differentiate yourself from the competition, especially as a third-party recruiter. Going the extra mile and contacting them 2 or 3 times and just really keeping them engaged. They will be much happier employees. They'll stay longer. They'll be and you'll have a healthier relationship with your manager, which will ensure a long-term relationship. So it's so key to go that extra step.
Yeah.
It's like my dad when he was, he's a dentist, and he picks up the phone every night and says, "Hey, how does your mouth feel?"
Right.
You got a shot. It's not great, but at least I'm doing a touch point with you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We actually have a question for you, Will, from Michael. Thanks for that. He said, "What's a good candidate to interview rate from an agency perspective?"
You know, I you got to be careful here, Michael. I mean, probably uh, if three submittals to a hire is probably what you would like to have. If you spend any more time, then you have too many can't you have too many hiring managers in the mix. You got to be careful. I mean, especially as a third-party recruiter, not to get taken on these other requisitions that can just linger forever and ever and ever. You need to make sure that you get the right candidates and get them interviewed and get them hired. And if they're not interviewing them, recalibrate and then figure out what you can do to get better candidates in there and get them closed.
Totally. So many questions coming in. I'm like trying to bounce through these. Everyone, if you don't get your question answered, I know Leela will help us make sure that somebody from her team or someone from this panel will get back to you. I promise, promise, promise. All right. So I like this question from Richard because I think it gets to kind of the external impact that we have. So let's talk about training hiring managers and setting realistic metrics for them. What are some realistic touch points or metrics that you've set with a hiring manager?
You know what drives me crazy?
I knew the third party guy would jump in.
You got to have a realistic.
Like
Right? You have to have a realistic.
Think about how awful hiring managers are.
Yeah.
You have to have a realistic number of people that interview someone, because if you have 15 people that interview for a Java engineer, there's going to be someone that doesn't like them. So let's break this down. Let's make it easier so this process works.
Absolutely.
I wholeheartedly agree with that, Will. It becomes sort of a Hunger Games versus are you actually trying to learn something about this person sometimes. So I counsel against that as well. One of the metrics I also like to put in, with regards to feedback, if I've sent you a stack of resumes or some 2 or 3 candidates have come in that week and we have, scheduled time within a certain number of days to review that together. To me, that's super important. It's not necessarily about, hey, shoot me an email or, hey, let me know your notes, but I've sent you some information. I'm going to give you 2 or 3 days to absorb, set up a meeting so we can walk through it together. Whether it's a defined metric I give them or just an automatic response to me setting them up for an interview or sending them a candidate, that is something I build in. If that can't happen, it sort of stops the whole engine dead in its tracks for kind of no reason, ties your hands when it comes to the candidate experience, and all sorts of other lag time costs and whatnot come back into play. So for me, it's that response time to and from your manager. If I can insert it as a here's our policy and have people follow that, I work in tech, that doesn't happen that often, so I just set up those meetings.
So I'd say a couple of things come to mind. One is I've seen companies actually set SLAs, again, for hiring managers and interviewers on timeliness of feedback. So you need to get your feedback in within, insert, 1 day, 2 days, whatever it happens to be. So that's one thing. And in Lever, you can actually set the custom ping so it's even as frequent as every 6 hours, which, it seems like a lot, but hey, if you've got a candidate that's in a competitive situation, you really need to get that feedback in quickly, because failure for you to get back to them in a timely manner is going to impact your process. So that's one thing. The other thing is, we were talking about NPS earlier. That's not just on you. That is not just on the recruiting team. That is on the entire organization. You are in this recruiting thing together, and so make sure that your hiring manager sees that NPS if you're going to take the time to gather it, because I am sure there is a ton of information in there on how they could do a better job, on how their interview panels could be better prepared, because interviewing is not just about the, what tchotchke you get when you walk in the door. It's about how people are made to feel in the process. And that is, as I said, just as much, if not more, on the hiring manager as it is on you as the recruiting team.
Yeah, I actually agree with that a lot. I also share Glassdoor interview feedback with my interview teams. It's
Yes.
a great motivator. You know, here's one example of where it really worked well is that we had some software engineering teams interviewing candidates, and the feedback kept coming back that it was a super easy interview. And I'm like, these people don't. But what it was is they were really nice people. So when they felt the candidate wasn't going to be able to take that technical step with them, they just pull back altogether and just make it a casual culture-based interview, leaving the candidate to walk away thinking they hadn't been assessed at all, but then got rejected. So we use that feedback to ask each interviewer to develop a plan B, a super easy technical test that they could give to anyone at almost any level that they could then, okay, they're not going to be able to do my coding challenge, but they could probably pass this. I want the candidate to walk away feeling at least good about something that they've been tested with. Then I can give them feedback later that's actually valid on why they weren't able to get to the next level. Something as simple as that came from Glassdoor reviews and candidates saying that the interviews were too easy, and that opened the door for the dialogue with my stakeholders to give them different training.
I love that plan B option. Like,
Plan B.
okay, if this isn't working, try something else instead of people just sitting there and being like, so I don't have any questions for you.
Spend a lot of time working with engineers. You just have to put things into sort of that process.
Yes, it totally goes back on your whole identify their priorities and translate it into their language. Absolutely. Um, Here's one more question from Carrie, and then we're actually going to let Leela show you guys some dashboards and some metrics. She says, does anyone have any metrics or stats for diverse hires? Gender, culture, physical ability. She said, is D&I becoming important to HR, or is it a barrier to meeting the goals they're being measured by? That's a perspective piece, but whoever wants to go first, please.
Diversity is one of those really tough ones that every recruiter just sort of like, again with the diversity. I think we need to expand what we view diversity to be to some extent. When I was working for Cisco and based over in Europe, you know, gender diversity in engineering, okay, I get it. There are 10 girls studying engineering and every company under the sun wants to hire them. What are the chances? But what we did was expand what diversity meant. We looked at disability programs, different ethnicities, lifestyles, choices, preferences, all became part of what we looked at because they do offer a diversity of perspective, and that's ultimately what we're working towards, isn't it? Not just meeting some government criteria checklist. So if we're after a diversity of perspectives, I think one of the best things that we can do for ourselves is a little bit off metric topic, but it ties in, is develop personas for the types of individuals who are successful at our company and try and enrich those personas with different backgrounds and perspectives that bring that same sort of priority to those types of individuals and leverage campaigns and attraction tools that sort of build off of bringing different personas into your company. That's sort of the approach I've taken with it. It's a tough nut to crack, but I'll let my colleagues speak more.
I will say to the part of the question is, does it matter? Oh yeah, it matters, and it's going to continue to matter. So I'm afraid whether you like it or not, it's something that you absolutely should be thinking about and prioritizing. It's very core to how we think about the world at Lever. We actually just hit 50% women, and we now have more female managers than male managers at Lever. So go us. But that's only one dimension of many, as Sedef said. And so I think that's one of the challenges with diversity in this sort of top of funnel and recruiting side is it's sort of hard to measure, right? I mean, I think you can obviously look at your slate and make sure that you're doing everything you can to diversify that based on visible criteria from backgrounds and so forth. But yeah, I think there's a lot more discussion to be had on this topic. So Katrina, maybe that's our next webinar.
I know, clearly. And that's our time. So that's not our time. That's our time for this video piece and answering questions. If you do have an outstanding question, know that we will get to that. So right now we are going to turn off our cameras, and I'm going to hand over. Thank you guys so much.
See you guys.
Awesome. And I'm going to hand over the reins to Leela so she can show you a little bit of what she was trying to reference when we were talking about those metrics dashboards.
And I am super excited about this because a lot of what we talked about actually in the webinar actually comes back to this. So can you see my screen now, Katrina?
Yes.
Perfect. So you're actually within, those of you who haven't seen Lever, welcome to Lever. We're within the reporting section of Lever, so I probably should have started in the main part with candidates, but seeing as we're here to talk about reporting, here we are. So one of the things that I think customers tend to love about Lever is the fact we have a very clean data set, which enables you to drill down on conversion rates. So Sedef was talking about the importance of conversion rates. Here we are in one of our standard summary reports on conversion rates. You'll see the summary statement here. So right now we're saying that of these almost 1,300 candidates that we looked at in the pipeline, 0.7% made it to hired. We can easily change this to recruiter screen, and lo and behold, the numbers change. All of the numbers below actually drill down to specific people. So you can click on the percentages and actually get to the candidates that are actually in the report. So all of our reporting is structured to try and give you as clean a data set as possible when you're looking into your recruitment. And you'll see here on the left-hand side, we have a bunch of canned reports around candidates, conversion rates, pipeline speed, offers, interviewing, so you can calibrate how well or how inconsistently your interviewers are evaluating candidates and so forth. So lots and lots to explore here. We'd be happy to give you a more in-depth look at our full set of reporting at any time. But the thing I'm excited to show you today is actually brand new in Lever. So last week we announced the availability of job posting dashboards in Lever, and they're available to your hiring managers as well as to recruiters working on roles. Now, the reason I think this is so important is a lot of what we talked about in the webinar today really came back to how can I work with the business in really setting expectations, holding hiring managers accountable, being on the same page, evaluating my recruiters in their performance on the work that they're doing. And so we basically released these very visual reports recently as a tool to help hiring managers and the recruiters get on the same page about the progress that they're making on a specific role. So in this example here, this is the job posting dashboard for this Android engineer position that's a full-time hire in New York. So the report starts out by, and by the way, this is all fake data, so don't hold me accountable if the numbers seem weird. But this report starts out by telling me the total number of candidates that we've evaluated for the role, how many offers we've extended, the hires and archived candidates, and gives you a high-level sense of the what the origin of those candidates were. Then scrolling down, you can actually see new candidates entering the pipeline week over week, and you can remove specific sources to actually focus in on specific types of candidate that you're interested in. So, woo, look at that. So, you can play around and really understand how the flow of candidates is changing over time. This might be useful, for example, if you are looking solely at referred candidates and, oh, look, when the rec was posted, we had this spike and then it dropped off. That might be a reminder that you can perhaps go and sort of start promoting the role internally again to try and increase that number of referred candidates coming into the pipeline. Scrolling down, then we get to look at interview distribution. So, first of all, to understand the number of panels that are taking place. So, for example, number of on-sites or phone screens and so forth, along with the number of events. So, for example, within an on-site interview, there might be multiple interviews that take place, multiple events. So it gives you a sense of the amount of work that's being done by the team. And then you see sort of a roll-up of the feedback consolidated across the different stages. So, that might enable you to say, well, you know what, we're getting 100% positive feedback when we go from stage X to stage Y. Either are we being too lenient, or is there any need to have that stage? Could we potentially even streamline our process for this particular role so that we don't need to actually go through that additional hoop? Moving on, we've got interview volume. So we talked earlier about the power of having not only lagging but leading indicators as well. And so this is a chart that will help you and your hiring manager understand not only the work that's been done, the interview volume that's taken place, but also what you have coming up on the docket. And this is probably going to serve as an incentive for your recruiter to work with your hiring manager in trying to keep up the activity. It's almost like when I'm looking at a marketing pipeline and activity that's coming, if I don't have more activity coming, I'm not going to get, potential candidates and hires. So almost what Will was saying earlier about just having that velocity and making sure that you've got the top of funnel activity going on. Then into interview feedback forms, a little bit more granular view on the number, the broken out by stage, the amount of time it's taken to complete. And then moving down, this is one of the things that I think has been most interesting, is to serve up predictions. So predictive analytics is kind of a hot thing, of course. This is very, to be honest, it's very simple math that's being done in the background, looking at your prior performance on specific roles and telling you what volume of candidates you need, how long it takes you to hire, and also the percentage of candidates that you hire. So this serves as a great indicator for where you're at in the process and how things are shaping up. Are you just dipping your toe into the process? Have you already seen more candidates than you typically need for a position? If so, what's going on with that? Nearly there in terms of things to show you. So candidate demographics. So again, this is interactive, so you can take a look at all of the candidates for a specific role. You can then drill down to the candidates that received an offer, and then those that were hired, and really understand for each of those different stages, what is the makeup. So here in this particular report, for example, LinkedIn is killing it in terms of not only the candidates but also the offers and hires. But that that will obviously vary by position. And then last, really, in terms of the report, is really understanding the conversion rate. So this comes back to, Sedef and I were sort of waxing lyrical about the importance of conversion rates. So really understanding what the conversion rate is when you move from stage to stage. So 81% of our new applicants actually make it into the next bucket, percentage that was archived, and so forth. So as you look at what's going on as people move down the funnel, it really helps you to understand, again, where are things potentially breaking down. If you're seeing a large volume of candidates being archived at a specific stage, why are so many candidates that aren't a fit making it to that stage? And clearly, that's acceptable up front where you've got applicants coming in and other sources that you're less sure about. But as the process goes by, hopefully you're getting better and better at identifying the right talent for the role. And, going back to an earlier comment I made, every time your team interviews somebody, that's an opportunity cost for your business, because the time they spend interviewing, while super valuable, is time that they could be spending doing something else. So you have to make sure every interview really counts in the process. So I think that's kind of like the summary of what we're now offering for every single role that you post through Lever, and it's available, as I said, to both recruiting teams and also the hiring managers that are responsible for the roles.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Leela. I really appreciate your time.
Of course.
All right, and for everyone who's still on the line, I just want to let you know that you will get a copy of this recording. You'll have that within 48 hours, and also expect a follow-up about Lever so they can talk to you a little bit more about these dashboards. And if you need anything, you can find us on Twitter at Recruiting Blogs, or you can find me, Katrina Kibben, and I'm always happy to help. Thank you so much for being here, and that's going to wrap for the day. All right, you all probably don't need the slides. We don't actually have slides, so there will not be slides just to answer that last question that just came in. Thank you, thank you. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.